For this demonstration, I'm going to use the detailed example of play in the back of the rulebook of the GMT edition of 1846, which can be downloaded from GMT's website. I will put a link in the video description, as people say. Now, supposing you've downloaded the Graphite jar folder from the Google Drive, we can start the application by clicking on Graphite jar. Now, the first thing we have to do is select a game log file. This could be a game that's already been started, but this is a new game, so we will call this GMT 1846 demo. Next, we have to specify which configuration file we're using. This is how the application knows what game we're playing. We just happen to have the 1846 configuration here. This is the what you might call the classic GUI. We are playing with 3 players, so we can enter 3, press return, then we're invited to enter the first player's name. This option is already highlighted in red, which means we can just press return to select it. The first player is called Amy. The second player is called Bob. Now, if we don't like this GUI, we can use a web GUI, press slash, which takes us to meta, which is a menu of actions for managing the application and controlling the game, essentially. We select W to start the web server. This tells us that the web server is listening on port 81. We can go to a web browser. We can type in 127.0.0.1, which is always this computer, and then :87, which is the port number that we were told about by the application. So we'll go to that. Let's make this full screen. Now we can continue. Player 3 is Carol. No, player 3 is Carlos. Now, because we're playing with 3 players in 1846, we don't use all the companies. We have to discard some. So we remove the Erie and Pennsylvania. And then we remove some private companies. We remove Michigan Central and Ohio and Indiana. And then remove Steamboat Company and the Tunnel Blasters. And now we're into the initial private company draft. Obviously this happens in secret, so what we're doing here is entering the results. Amy has purchased the Michigan Southern. So she now has that and $260 left over. That's all she buys, so we select pass for her. Bob has bought Chicago and Western Indiana and Lakeshore Line. And he also buys the mail contract, but he doesn't pay the $80 face value for that. He only pays $60. So we can select buy at variable price to allow that. We can actually use the mouse to select these. And obviously if we're using a tablet, we would use our finger on this option. And then we can press return, or we can press the submit button. He is buying the mail contract for $60. Now, the application knows now that we can only buy a maximum of 1 company at variable price, so we have to go back to buying at face value. But in fact, Bob's spending spree is over, so he just passes. And then it's Carlos who buys the Big 4 and the meat packing company, and there's nothing left to buy, so that's the end of the round. Now we go into the first stock round proper. Amy has the priority deal, as indicated by a lovely elephant, and what she does is start the grand trunk. So she's buying treasury shares. We can just press B here. We can press type BT, but we can just press B. That's enough. We just have to type enough letters to get a unique option. And she's buying grand trunk. She has to select the opening price, which is $60. Grand Trunk gets its $120. It gets a couple of tokens. We see that there are 8 shares left in the treasury. Amy has 2. The asterisk, of course, indicates that she's the president. And now it's Bob's turn. Bob is going to launch the New York Central. So buy from treasury, select New York Central, and he chooses $80 as the opening price. It's now Carlos. He goes for the Illinois Central. He chooses $80 as the opening price. The IC now has $240 because he gets a bonus of $80. And we're back to Amy. Amy buys another Grand Trunk. Bob buys another New York Central. Carlos cross-invests in the New York Central. And it's back to Amy, who buys a New York Central. Everybody's run out of money, so Bob, Carlos, Amy now pass. And we're into the first operating round, and it's the first independent railroad to operate, the Michigan Southern. We notice, of course, that Bob has the priority deal for the next stock round. Michigan Southern is going to spend $20 laying track, so this is train cost, so you pick T, enter the $20. So we could, of course, try entering 15 here, but we're told that we had to spend a multiple of 10 because all the terrain costs a multiple of 10. Likewise, we could go crazy and attempt to spend $70 on terrain, but we're not allowed to do that either. Let's spend the $20, and then it runs its 2 train for $60. Has no choice but to pay half. So Amy receives her $30. Michigan Southern gets some money. And it's time for the Big Four, which spends $40 on track and then runs for $40. And now it's time for the Grand Trunk, because we are running in the first operating round in reverse share price order. Talking of share price order, we can look at the stock market. We see the Grand Trunk at 60 and the New York Central and Illinois Central at 80. And we can also see the future trains, which causes all the trains and their costs. Grand Trunk is going to issue 2 shares, and then it's going to spend $40 on terrain, and then it's going to lay a token. Token is K because T is already taken for terrain. 1 token disappears. It has to run for 0 because there's no trains, and it has to withhold, although it can actually choose any of those options because the effect only depends on the amount actually paid. We withhold, the share price goes down to 50, and then we buy trains. TS, no point buying from another company because nobody has any to sell, so we buy a 2 train and another 2 train. We stop buying trains, and that's the end of our go. And then the New York Central is now going to issue 4 shares. It spends $40 on track, and then it's going to buy all the remaining 2 trains. It chooses to buy a 3-5 train as well. It's now at its train limit, so even though it could afford with its $240 another 3-5 train, because it's at its train limit, it's not actually given that option. So we have no choice but to finish buying trains. And finally, it's the Illinois Central's turn. It issues 2 shares, and then it's going to run for nothing, and it's going to buy a 3-5 train. We go back to the train stack, we can now see that various trains have disappeared. And now we're into operating round 1.2. So it's Michigan Southern again. But first, the private companies have already operated. Meat Packers have paid Carlos 15, Chicago West paid Bob 10, Lakeshore Line has paid Bob 10. The Michigan Southern is going to spend $60 on terrain, and then it's going to run for 70. And then the big four, also going to spend $20 on an upgrade, and it's going to run for 50. Now it's the New York Central's turn because we're running in descending stock price order. New York Central is going to buy in a private, so we select BC. It's going to buy the Lakeshore line. We enter the purchase price. Bob before this has $50, so we enter the 40. Bob goes up to $90, and the Lakeshore line is now owned by the New York Central. Now the New York Central goes on to pay $120 in terrain costs, and it lays a token in Detroit, and then it's going to run its trains for $370. We're going to half pay, and the share price goes up to $90. And then it's going to buy some more privates, so we can buy the mail contract for $80, and then we can buy Chicago and Western Indiana for $60, and that's the end of its turn. Now the Illinois Central is going to lay a token, and we can build a track after laying a token in this game, so we have that option here. We spend $40 on terrain, and then we buy the meat packing company from Carlos for $60. Then we run for $140, pay a full dividend, share price goes up to $90, and that is the end of its go. The Grand Trunk is just going to run its trains for $160. Now it's an interesting case because we've pressed R, which could be short for redeem, but is also short for run train. The purple indicates that if we press return, it will now turn red, and that becomes the option that will be selected if we press return again. We enter $160, and then we pay in full. Now we're going to buy the Michigan Southern for $60. The Michigan Southern is now closed, which indicates by becoming this darker color here. And that is the end of the Grand Trunk's go. And we're into the second stock round, so as promised, Bob has priority. Bob is now going to buy another New York Central, but he's going to buy one of the ones from the bank pool, so it's B or B Bank. Carlos, Amy and Bob are now going to buy the rest of those shares. They all do the same thing. And then Carlos is going to buy from the treasury. And then Amy is going to buy a Grand Trunk share. Bob's going to buy a Grand Trunk from the stock market. And then everyone is going to pass. But as a result of that, there have been some share price changes. New York Central is held by the player, so its share price goes up to 100. Illinois Central and Grand Trunk could go down because they have shares in the bank pool / stock market. Whenever the share price changes, it is italicized in the display here, at least until another button is pressed. So we can see that the stock market has also been updated to reflect these changes. And I think I'll stop there. In another video, I'll show what to do to correct errors, which involves using the meta and also inspecting the graph, which shows the history of all the actions in the game.